Hi, everyone. I'm Megan Griffin with ACRL. Thanks so much for joining us for today's Student Learning and Information Literacy Committee Publications Team webinar, Getting Started with Researching and Writing in Academic Librarianship. Just a few quick housekeeping notes before we get started. Closed captioning is available, so please click on the Show Captions button at the bottom of the screen if you'd like to enable captions. Please use the chat for comments and questions throughout the webinar. We'll have dedicated time for Q&A at the end. And this presentation is being recorded, so we'll send the link out of the recording shortly after today's event. And now I'll turn it over to KP to get us started. KP, the floor is yours whenever you're ready.
Muted. Great. And I got the slides to work. So yay, we have slides. Thanks everyone for joining us. I'm super excited about this panel. I know we're going to have a great time. My name is KP May. I'm a member of the publications team for ACRL Student Learning and Information Literacy Committee. I will be hosting today's session. As Megan said, this session will be recorded. So feel free to share with your friends, your colleagues, so we can spread the word about the awesome work that we're doing. All right, just a little bit of background. The committee that put on this event is part of ACRL's committee structure. However, there is a particular team of the committee, and I want to make sure we shout out this team because they did the bulk of the work for this. So the publications team, which includes myself, I know Jane Nichols is on the call. Hopefully some of our other friends are on the call. This is actually a webinar that is a kind of like a part two to something we did last year. So we hope that we have some familiar faces joining us for this webinar. If you're interested in the work that the publications team does, essentially we are responsible for making sure that the perspectives on the framework column that is released in the publication gets published. And so some of the recent publications that we've had in this column are listed below under the description. If you're ever interested in writing about the framework, particularly our columns usually deal with like how the framework intersects with practice and some of the tensions or opportunities that lie within that space. So if you are interested in writing about the framework, how you use it, how you think it can be augmented, feel free to reach out to us and we can hopefully get you on the publications calendar. All right, so next up, we're going to hop right into the panel. I'm actually going to let my panelists introduce themselves in the order that they appear here on the screen. Wonderful panelists, if you would do me a favor, give us your name, your pronouns, all these things are obviously on the screen, your place of work, but I also want you to let the audience know about your current work or any work you have coming out or things that you've written lately that you think people should read. So we're going to start with my friend Denise. Denise, get us started.
Thanks so much, KP, and thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Denise Solis. My pronouns are she, ella. I also speak Spanish, so shout out to that. I currently work as the digital collections librarian at the University of Denver, and my current work is around organizational learning and organizational management. I'm just really interested in why libraries have been kind of stuck in the way that they are, and I'm currently finalizing a chapter in an edited volume from it's called, well, the title of the chapter is called Organizational Unlearning: Academic Libraries as Racialized Organizations. And it's coming up in an edited volume called Performance Management and Organizational Learning in Academic Libraries from ACRL Press. The publication date of everything is TBD, as is with any, I think, writing project. It takes way longer than you think. But yeah, just really excited about that. And I'll pass it on to my next panelist, Anne.
Thanks, Denise. Hello, everyone. I'm Anne Matsushima Chu. My nickname is Amisa, and I use she, they pronouns. I'm currently the social science and zine librarian at Reed College in Portland, Oregon, which is a small liberal arts college in the Pacific Northwest. I do a lot of writing and research around zines, DIY presses, independent publication, grassroots literacy, and specifically around zine librarianship. A recent chapter that I had published is in the art at the Intersection of Librarianship and Social Justice, edited by Nina Clements, by Library Juice Press. And I wrote a chapter with my colleague Maria Cunningham called Disruption in the Stacks, Using Zines to Make Space for Creativity, Outreach, and Social Justice. And so I've done a couple of chapters on talking about zines in libraries and working specifically with college students and college and using zines as a way of increasing our outreach and engagement for those students to kind of create primary source resources for themselves, especially with those with marginalized identities, as well as start using those zines for research. So I'm excited to be here, and I'll pass it on to the next panelist, Jamila.
Thank you. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Good to be here and to see all of you. My name is Jamila, and my pronouns are she, her. As it shows on the screen, I am a PhD student at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, but I'm also critical pedagogy research librarian at Harvard University. And also just want to shout out that also I'm a co-host of Lib Voices along with Jamia Williams. And actually, Denise was one of our interviewees on one of our episodes. If anyone is looking, can check that out online to hear more from Denise. I would say my most recent chapter is not published yet. I wrote a chapter on criticality in an upcoming book on keywords in library and information sciences. So look out for that to come out sometime this year. And I think that's it.
Great. I did not. Okay, so listen, sidebar. Jamia is my girl. Okay. And I did not know y'all were on the podcast together. I love it. Okay. Great. So I'm glad that we're all in community and we all have some familiar friends. So this is good. This is good. All right. Oh, before I get started with the panel, I do want to make sure that everyone knows, feel free to drop questions in the Q&A function. Drop those questions in at any time. However, we're going to answer them at the end. So as questions come up, feel free to add them to the Q&A option, but we will answer those at the end. So our first question, which is pretty much a two-parter. So what is your process, or what is your idea generation or writing process? And then can you speak to balancing time for this in context with your daily work? I know that some folks have built into their schedule time to do research, to do some writing, and others don't. So does anyone want to start us out and talk about what that looks like in your work? Should I call somebody?
I can
Jamila?
get started. I think, well, idea generation is, I think, something that tends to come naturally. There's always lots of ideas and things that I'm interested in personally. And also, I think the hard part really is just kind of like narrowing down those ideas and actually trying to figure out which things to pursue, which things to kind of put on the back burner. I think there's always going to be a flow of ideas, and it's hard to sometimes prioritize certain ones over others because you can't do all of it, right? And so the actual ideas just kind of come up, I would say, naturally through work, through scholarship that you're reading or have been exposed to, what others are talking about at conferences and things like that. It just kind of happens naturally. I will say the balance of time is also a difficult thing. I actually am allotted 20% of my work time towards writing and school, actually, which is still writing. Lots of writing and reading and that kind of thing. But even with that, it can be hard to make sure that you actually set that side of time, that time aside for that. Other things are always coming up, especially if you're working full time while trying to do any kind of publishing and writing, especially if you're a librarian, working librarian, where writing is not always necessarily something that is part of your position or required of your position. And so a lot of times that means that you actually have to figure out when to squeeze in that writing. But I think being intentional even if it does mean that you're not going to be able to use a lot of work time towards that, but just trying to figure out how to carve out that time is something that you would have to prioritize. And then once you do that, sticking to it, right? Which is really the hard part, is making sure that you actually use that time for the writing and not anything else.
Thanks for that, Jamila. And Denise, anyone want to chime in?
Oh, I could. I was nodding a lot because I have faculty status at my institution, so 20% of my time is set aside, like Jamila was saying, for writing. But like in everyday life, it's very difficult because I'm a supervisor. I supervise 4 staff. Well, now it's only 2, but I supervise a department essentially. And oftentimes it's not quite easy for me to kind of, even though I, for example, block off Fridays as a writing day, not every Friday ends up actually being a writing day. So protecting that time is difficult because again, like I'm a supervisor, it's not just my time. I have to, if the library is on fire, which hasn't been, but there's like fires to put out, so to speak, that do dictate some of my time. I've been very grateful to kind of have accountability groups with like other colleagues here, like Natalia Manya, who's in this webinar. I love her so much. And she and Lauren Turner, who are my colleagues here, we have a Friday Writing Accountability group. Honestly, groups and accountability are the one thing that helped me a lot, because trying to prioritize my time for writing is just really difficult for me. And oftentimes, and I know I'm kind of blending the answers to the question, I'm sorry. I tend to talk fast when I'm really nervous and that's coming out, so I apologize. But basically, the idea generating also happens when I talk to my colleagues. I don't like the word complain, but when we see that there is a gap or there is an issue in our everyday life, we tend to talk about why is that happening? Are there any ways that we can address those issues? And oftentimes those our proposed solutions kind of end up being what we write about, or like, I often also call my research me search. One of the early things that I was writing about was mentorship and language use in libraries, because my first language is Spanish. And so again, like I was just trying to find myself in the field and librarianship. And so that is also sometimes where I got my ideas of, again, is kind of seeing that gap. Um, and yeah, just balancing that time is so hard. And the last thing I'll say is just definitely using all of your perks as faculty to carve out that time, because we do also have short-term writing leave. So I took 2 weeks like off to write. Like you have to apply for it and you have to, make your case, but like you have up to a certain amount of time to request off so you can use that. So I will say that's the real benefit of having that faculty status, is kind of having these mechanisms around to helping you carve out that time.
And I
And
can, yeah. Well, I actually don't have faculty status, so the librarians at my institution were staff, while we're under the dean of faculty, though. So it's kind of an interesting place. So a lot of my writing has come out of kind of my desire to either share my experience. I love when Denise says me search, because a lot of my writing came out of me being a zine maker in the community, and I was a zinester first, and then I became a librarian, and then I started doing research on zine librarianship. So a lot of it was just like things that I naturally wanted to share about. But I do a lot of like reading beforehand, and I do a lot of brainstorming. I'm a big journaler, and when I do get the time to write, it's pretty flexible in my position. So while we don't have like a certain percentage of time, and we don't actually have a requirement for service and publishing, it's a part of my department as research services that we're all kind of engaged in it anyways, just to be, just to like keep up to speed with our colleagues and stay collaborative. So a lot of it is like collaborations that I'm involved with, and some of the writing I do on my own. It's harder though, like it's harder to kind of create that time for myself and stick to a schedule. And so I've kind of entered in a new kind of space where a lot of my writing is in partnership with someone else, whether or not that's with my direct colleague, at my institution or someone else in the community. And that's been really generative for me. So I like to bounce ideas off of, I like to talk it out a lot of times first and just have a lot of like coffee shop dates and Zoom calls and things like that and get it all out first. And then the writing part for me comes afterward. And then we kind of just like bounce back and forth. So balancing the time was hard. I started a doctorate of education, and there was required a lot of writing during the pandemic, and I just actually couldn't balance it as a full-time working librarian and also a parent. Just became too hard. So I've had to kind of like tamp that down into a master's, and then in order for me to do kind of personal writing on the side. So.
Yes. Thanks for sharing that. I would say, honestly, from my experience, the biggest piece of advice I can give to anyone is like write about what you do. That way it doesn't seem like a totally different task from what you're currently working on. So that's good. All right. Question number 2. Who or what do you consult when you experience difficulties during your idea generation or writing process? So give us all the juicy secrets. Who wants to? Should I call a name?
I'll
Jamila, are you
jump
ready?
in.
Like,
um, let's see. I think I have, well, I have people I can go to within like the PhD program. So that's already kind of like built in. And I think that's definitely been a great resource. But then I also have colleagues, who are practitioners in the field, working in the field, who I can bounce ideas off of. I also mentioned Jamia Williams earlier, and we're going to be probably doing some writing together as well around Lib Voices. But those kinds of things come up, right? I like, again, organically, a lot of times with different people who working also in the field, and not necessarily working with you, right? And where you work at your library, but other libraries. Also, there's a small cohort of critical pedagogy librarians that has developed over the last few years since my position was created. And we have come together to do presentations and things like that together, and have also talked about writing and that kind of thing in the past. But like, again, just to kind of reiterate that it can happen pretty much with any number of people who you already interact with, either on site where you work. Also, just kind of mentioning that I've been working with the reference librarians team, which I am on at my university, and we are now collaborating on a piece around what we are calling inclusive reference. And so we'll be publishing something along around that whole topic soon. And those are, my work colleagues. And so these, different people to bounce ideas off of and kind of work through ideas as well as difficulties in trying to get pieces done. I think that there are different communities that you can have and turn to for that. And in some cases, the communities are kind of already there and built in, but in other cases, you have to create those communities that you can go to and try to identify kind of like-minded people who are into writing as well. I did see a few people in the comments talk about how they are not faculty, and writing is not part of their job, and so these are going to be like extra things that you have to do to create those communities, myself included. Like although I do have a allotted time where I can do some writing on my job, which I'm very thankful for, I'm actually not faculty. We're not faculty at Harvard, and we don't have a requirement to publish as well, and so you have to be even more motivated to get those things done, because because of the fact that it's not a requirement, and you might not necessarily have built-in resources, right? So I think kind of creating those communities around you wherever you can, with like-minded people who are also wanting to do maybe some of the same things, and those can be your tribe in terms of who you turn to when you're experiencing difficulties around generating ideas and writing, and kind of fulfilling that writing process.
One thing that you said, Jamila, that came to mind was like, what resources do folks need when we're experiencing difficulty in our writing? For me, because like I have to build in time, I have to find the time and the space. A lot of it was funding too. We don't really have like a built-in sabbatical for research and writing. And so actually this year I've decided that I need to go find that funding for myself, and create that space for myself to be like, okay, and take it to my boss and say, I found some funding for myself. Can I have, a week or two of leave to go and do this research? So actually, recently I've been awarded the Barnard Library Research Grant, which has been really exciting for me. So I'm actually able to take 2 weeks to go to New York next year to do any sort of research that I want to do. So I'm going to do some research on Asian American feminist zines in their archives and try to find some stories, firsthand accounts of, Asian American punks and DIY activists and things like that, that I have never encountered in the collections that I've seen here in Portland. So, creating kind of like going out and try to find that money for yourself to take back if you are not, if you're in a similar position that I am, a community college librarian or a staff position, finding that funding and then taking it to your directors and saying, I did all this work and I found some funding. Can I have a little bit of leave to go off and do my, professional development types of writings? I also like to write not in my office. So I often take my laptop and go to a coffee shop and I, work there for a couple hours, and that really allows me to kind of get in the zone. And I've also found a couple of colleagues that are like my editors. So I will give them bits of writing and then say like, does this make sense? And they'll be like, okay, well, in terms of like if I'm a reader and my thought process, I would want you to switch this around. And so that's been really helpful for me, to know that I have a couple of people that are kind of in my court, and willing to kind of help me think through like my different mentors and things like that.
And congratulations, Anne. That's so exciting.
Oh,
Um,
thank you.
yeah, grants are really important. Anything to fund your scholarship is helpful. And I also want to kind of build on just the fact that communities, their connections are so important, especially as you come up like in any, whether you're a student graduating or a staff member, like whatever position you're in, reaching out and building that community, to make sure that you know where the grants are, where the writing opportunities are. For me, I also have a group of women of color that I often ask is, for feedback from basically like my editors too. And that's really been helpful. I think really the only difficulty I've had is thinking sometimes about my audience, and tailoring what I'm trying to say to a predominantly white profession. That's something that I struggle with, because oftentimes I just want to just say the thing, and sometimes I do, and sometimes in my writing you can tell that I do anyway. But sometimes too, like it depends on the audience where I'm turning to for advice. Sometimes it'll be like my other white colleagues who think we think alike, or sometimes it'll be, my people of color friends. But yeah, I think communities and connections and making sure that you're like staying on top of, because I like all the journals I keep tabs on, like who's publishing in what journal. Because you can also connect to people who you're thinking of, whose writing inspires you, who they, you can always connect. People love to talk about what they're writing about. So don't hesitate to reach out to an author or anything like it, of a piece that you really like. Um, so yeah, I think I just want to end with that.
Good, good. All right, thanks for that, y'all. Next question, which is another two-parter situation. What challenges have you faced during the publication process? And then how do you overcome anxiety, time barriers, or other challenges you might have encountered? So what happens, and then how do you knock it out the park? And then please, y'all, let's give Jamila a break now, okay? My girl has been coming up first to bat every time.
Okay. Yeah.
I will
I'll
hop in. Um, one of the biggest challenges that have popped up is when you submit something and then it takes the publisher and editor a long time to publish, and it's oftentimes situations out of their hands, and so I'm not putting any blame on anyone. But I had this experience where I submitted a piece and it was during the pandemic, and so it was during the pandemic, the funding disappeared, maybe there was a little bit of turnover, all these external challenges popped up, and it was something that we had to wait almost 4 full years for it to be published. And a lot of actually people pulled their chapter from the book project, and so it was complicated because it kept changing, and there, people were like, where is it, especially folks that had written it for like a 10-year packet or something like that. And it was challenging for me because almost like I had a hard time like doing the next project because I knew that this one was coming and I wanted to build, I don't know, I'm a person that always likes to kind of like build on the next thing. And so it was really hard for me to be like, how do I write the next thing when that other thing has not even seen the light of day yet? And then when it did come out, I was so scared that what I wrote it wasn't gonna be relevant anymore. And so I was just like paranoid that what was coming out was like, oh my gosh, was that 4 years ago? So much has happened in this world since that point. Will people read it and be like, what the heck are they talking about? And so there was a lot of like anxiety that came out when you're like putting your work out there and then it takes a long time for it to come out. And so I just actually at a certain point, I just had to let it go and almost like pretend that maybe it would never be published and kind of come to terms with it in order to kind of move on. And then finally it did. And the book is great and it's fantastic. And there's so many great chapters in there. And then also one of my other challenges is moving from like a chapter writer where it's like I'm pretty comfy right now as a chapter writer to moving into like peer-reviewed article writing. And I think I haven't quite got that yet. That's like something that's kind of a goal of mine to challenge myself to uh, and I don't, like Denise, you're mentioning like keeping an eye out to who's writing and what journals and things like that. So I think I'm like need to start kind of actually paying attention to who's writing where and how they're writing and what kind of journals are picking up those types of topics. And then challenging myself to like, I guess, write a piece and then submit. I think with chapters, I'm often writing an idea and then I have like 6 months to write the piece. With articles, what I'm feeling like is like you have to write the piece and then submit it. And so I think my brain just hasn't caught on to that new workflow yet. So that's a big challenge that I have right now. And if anyone out there in the webinar is like an expert on getting people to get their, first or second peer-reviewed article, I'm gonna raise my hand. That I'm here and that's like one of my goals.
So I would kind of just agree with some of what Anne has already said. I think also that one of I would personally one of my major challenges has just been like time barriers and also like again what Anne stated as external factors. I think while we're out here trying to publish, life is still lifing, right? And there's still things going on all around you that get in the way of daily life, let alone trying to write an article. So those things happen, and sometimes you're not able to overcome it in a sense of maybe you have to pull out of that publication or kind of step away from that project that you wanted to do or journal that you may have been accepted to, but now it's just become maybe untenable. And there's nothing wrong in that because like again things happen outside of the scholarship and the writing. You still have a regular life going on, and those things can change what you may have had planned or had in mind, and that's okay. You have to just kind of like adapt and maybe find a different place for that article when you have more time to actually do it and submit it somewhere else. That's always a possibility. Like it's not the end of the world if you are trying to write something for a publication and it doesn't really come together in the way that you want it to. So I think that people, want to be open to that and the possibility of if that happens, because you don't want to feel like this is the end of the world kind of thing, which I think it can be if you kind of have that kind of thinking of like this is it, this is the thing, right? So be open to maybe changing that if it doesn't quite work out. But in terms of actually overcoming and still being able to move through that kind of thing, I think when it comes to time, again, coming back to scheduling the time and really trying to be intentional in terms of how you use that time to write. But also sometimes you can ask for more time from a publication or the editors or of a journal, that kind of thing. It doesn't always work out, because if they have a strict timeline, then they might not be able to give you more time. But sometimes, a lot of times actually, you ask more time for more time, that they can accommodate that. And so that's something to think about as well. You don't have to stay silent. You can go to the editors and see if that's even a possibility. And in terms of like kind of overcoming anxiety, again, I would say go back to your community and talk through those things with some people that you trust about those feelings of anxiety. I think that it's very natural to have that for various reasons, honestly. And to have someone to talk to about it is a great way to try to work through that. But again, I think some of it is just really kind of adjusting your own mindset about what you're doing, how you're doing it, how this is not the only opportunity for publishing. There are plenty of opportunities out there and other ways that you can disseminate your scholarship, a variety of ways, even if it's changing to a presentation or things like that, or a webinar such as this. There are just different ways that you can get your scholarship out there, and the publication doesn't have to be the first thing. So thinking of different ways to do that is another way of maybe possibly overcoming challenges that might arise when you're trying to get something out there.
Yes, and to piggyback off that, actually, I remember I had a mentor who told me that their style, which is kind of what I ended up doing sometimes, is that you do like a presentation or a workshop first, if you to gauge how the audience feels about it too and what questions come up, and that actually helps improve whatever article or an actual public, like whatever chapter, whatever you decide to write. And I 100% agree. Like I feel like there's a lot of pressure. I mean, it makes sense for some institutions, especially if you're a tenured institution, like to feel like if you're not publishing, right, like publish or perish, that quote, that is very real for some people. So I don't want to diminish that kind of anxiety. And at the same time, it's okay to withdraw I've withdrawn a peer review publication because I will say I feel like a challenge I face is editors. They can all be so different. You can get super in-depth comments, like line by line for your article with, these two editors, and then the other editors are just like giving you broad comments and no direction. Like, it kind of experience the spectrum of different editors. So that can also be a challenge when, especially sometimes you want more detailed feedback on how to improve, a chapter. And that challenge is just something that, like I said, in one case we did withdraw because we didn't feel like the editors were giving us like enough feedback. And also there were other issues, but I'm not gonna get into those. But basically, yeah, just kind of that, and deadlines are also difficult because sometimes some journals have specific deadlines. Um, and that's a whole other scheduling kind of nightmare where some people will give you more time, some people won't. Um, But I think at the end of the day too, like your writing is you, and I feel like you really should just protect what you want to put out there. Especially in my writing, I always look for open access journals. That's just something that I'm like, if I'm gonna write something, it has to be publicly available. Um, so all of the writing that I've done so far is. Um, I think going back to the question, there has been another kind of anxiety that I have, because Spanish is my first language, was my first language, and oftentimes I get comments. The most like common feedback I get from an editor is that I always have passive voice, because the sentence structures in Spanish are very different in English, and like I always somehow mess that up. And so my mind is just like, I don't know how to fix it. I try, but like that's just one anxiety that I've talked about with my other friends who are bilingual, who have this like anxiety. And they're just like, but that's just you, Denise. That's the way you talk. Like, that's what it is. You're bilingual. Like, and I'm like, I don't know. I guess I'm just never going to sound academic-y. And that's, I don't know. That's fine with me. Like, I don't care anymore. Like, it is what it is. As long as people understand what I'm trying to say, it's okay. So that's just one kind of interesting kind of thing that I've tried to overcome throughout my whole academic career.
Yeah. I had a similar issue with passive voice. So in solidarity, sister, in solidarity. All right. Next question. How have you developed your knowledge and expertise with research methods you employed? So we got some surveys. Have y'all done any content analysis? What is your go-to research?
I could jump in. I got asked to do a chapter on the future of zines for kind of cataloging the zines book. And I was like, how am I supposed to know the future of anything? I don't know how I'm supposed to write this chapter about the future of zines. And there's supposed to be like an ALA publication. I'm like, I don't know. And so the only way I knew how to do it is to like kind of deploy a survey. Survey, I've started doing a lot of surveys, and these surveys often have a lot of kind of like qualitative questions, and allows the people that want to answer the survey to kind of speak from their own experiences. And then for that particular chapter, I basically wrote the chapter based on 80 respondents. And I was like, I don't know the history of zines, but you all submitted this survey, and you're gonna like basically like, a lot of you are very like heavily involved in the community and in libraries and in at academic spaces. And just gonna like mash them all up together, and say, this is what you said as the history of these. And so I feel like it could work for other things too, where I do a lot of like student actually surveys, because a lot of what I'm thinking about is like student engagement. And so I end up chatting a lot with my students, and we do a lot of like reflective type processes, where whenever we have any sort of programming or engagement, I will pull the students that I work with very closely off to the side, and we will do hour-long reflections. I'll have them make zines based on those reflections. Well, I will have them do reflections without me in the room to get a little bit more of an honest picture of like what is actually happening. And so, and all of that then becomes things that I kind of ask for permission to use in my writing. So those are, and a lot of interviews. I did one chapter with this really neat method called dual ethnography, which was basically my colleague Maria and I having a conversation about a similar topic, and then it really allowing us to talk through our own experiences, me as an Asian American woman and her as a Black woman, and really us two coming together and talking about zines, which is often situated in very white spaces. So dual ethnography then became a method that I really like, because it allowed that chapter to feel more real. Like, and oftentimes I get, I'm also kind of similar to Denise, where I get really like, I feel like, do I belong? I feel a lot of imposter syndrome, and that's something I'm working through. And so I'm like, well, is my voice academic enough? But with dual ethnography, it's an academic method that allows for a lot of those kind of like informal conversations to become academic. So, yeah, and I always come across these methods through colleagues. They always will just like toss it in the Slack or something and be like, "Have you tried this?" And I'll look it up and I'll be like, "Oh, that's really neat and it actually fits my situation pretty well." So,
So I think obviously being a PhD student, I've been exposed to a lot of research methods just by nature of being a student. And that exposure has come, through coursework as well as other informal opportunities. And I will say that, outside of like being in school, there are a lot of resources and opportunities out there to be exposed to research methods. There are conferences and things that you can go to. I know there's like a qualitative research conference that happens where you can attend and really learn about different types of methods. I had the opportunity to actually attend a mixed methods research workshop through the University of Michigan, which is kind of a leader in that area. And so they are known for this workshop that I think um, was maybe created by John Cresswell, if not mistaken. And so that's one place to look for in terms of kind of getting and gaining an expertise in research methods outside of like your typical schooling, kind of venue. But then also before even becoming a PhD student, I had the opportunity to participate as a scholar in IRDL, which is the Institute for Research Design and Librarianship, which I would highly recommend. And they do this institute every summer. They've been doing it for quite a while now. I was in the second cohort, but I think there's been like maybe six now, not mistaken. And so I think that is definitely a place that you can look to. Um, yeah, that was something that they announced recently, and but I believe that they actually might be changing that. I've heard something about them getting maybe some funding, so that might change, which is why I'm mentioning IRDL to just maybe keep an eye out for that, just in case. Um, uh, and yes, fingers crossed. And so that has been a great resource, and that which really targeted librarians who were wanting to learn research and writing, especially as we've already kind of mentioned, how these are not necessarily things that are embedded in your position wherever you're working, especially if you're not considered faculty. So there are opportunities out there, even aside from IRDL, of where you can kind of pick this up. I would say definitely conferences is probably a good way to go. Those specialized conferences that are actually about research and methods. So maybe keep an eye out for those. Um, and honestly, self-guided reading and learning can never fail you. So that's definitely something that you can look into yourself. But as you begin to kind of educate yourself on these kinds of things, you can reach out to people. Like if you read a particular article where they're using research methods that appeal to you, you can reach out to that person to find out more about what they did and how they went about it. And also like people like us that you see are talking about these things, you can reach out to those people that you're seeing who maybe can kind of give you some more guidance or point you to things that you can reach out to on your own and learn. But I definitely would say that you can always pick up some things and kind of like get started by reading what is out there, what others have done, and then making connections with people who can maybe give you a little bit more guidance and direction on what to do and how to go about it. But there are resources out here. There are workshops and conferences and things like that are available, and you might have to put in some legwork to seek those things out, but they are out there. And you can I wouldn't want this to be a roadblock for you to getting the knowledge that you need. and getting started with what that is so that you can build that expertise. It's very possible to do. And while you may not have it right now, you can get it. I can tell you that for sure, that you can get to where you need to be in order to feel more confident in doing this kind of work. And I think Anne has already kind of spoken to, like, sometimes there's the imposter syndrome that comes up, and that can come up for all of us, even having published already some things, and some that can be something you have to work through as well. But just don't let that be the thing that stops you from reaching this, that this is something that you really want.
I definitely want to echo that. A lot of this is self-guided, self-directed learning, especially, and not, there's not a bad thing about MLIS programs, but MLIS programs I don't think are designed for the kind of research that, like, which also that's kind of like, I don't know, research can be anything, but there are a lot of modalities that the MLIS program doesn't cover in terms of research methodologies. Like, it's not gonna do that. Like, I actually went back to school. I'm getting a certificate. Well, it's a certificate in research data management, but as part of it, I took Intro to Qual, Intro to Quant, Intro to Stats, like all these that have really helped up my research game. So I would say there's always like the formal way of taking classes, but there is also the self-guided stuff, the reading books, reaching out at conferences, and also shout out, thank you to everyone who's added stuff to the chat about all, especially the librarian parlor. I know is a really good one. IRDL, I've heard is a really good one too, which Jamila mentioned, but like, thank you for everyone for sharing in the chat. Oh, and thank you for the love earlier. But yeah, self-guided learning always works. And again, reaching out to people who are doing, I remember one time I had gone up to a faculty, like not like, this was not a librarian person, this was a faculty member in education, because I wanted to know about her work. It was a specific thing, and she was just like super happy to talk about it. So again, most people generally are really happy to talk about their methodology, their work, and so don't be afraid to reach out, overcome that kind of imposter syndrome. At the end of the day, we're all just learning. Even like, yeah, I still struggle with imposter syndrome, even though I'm like 10 years deep in this game. But yeah, just don't be too shy. Just look stuff up. I mean, we're all librarians, we can do that. And just build on where you're finding, what you're learning, and what you know.
Great, great. So we are 13 minutes, if my math is correct, from the end of the session. We have a couple of more questions left, but I actually want to go ahead to the Q&A session. I'm going to skip some things because we had a lot of things come in through Q&A. It looks like we have 13 questions in the Q&A. We'll try to get through as many as possible. What I'm going to do is, I'm not sure if everyone can see the questions in the Q&A. I know that the panelists probably can. But I'm going to copy and paste the question from the Q&A into the chat, just so I can make sure that everyone sees them all. Okay, perfect, perfect. Thanks, y'all, for letting me know. All right, so the first Q&A or question from the chat is, do you have any favorite resources, blogs, particular journals, etc., that help get your brain juices flowing?
I gotta say, I'm a little biased because I used to be on the editorial board, but In the Library with a Lead Pipe, like, that's a classic for me.
I would say, I think that, well, uh, this is not planned, but ACRL's publications I think are great. And I'm thinking specifically of what is it, CNRL News, which is not like it's not the scholarly journal, right? The news one, I think both of them are great, but also just kind of want to point out the news journal, because that one is maybe a little bit more accessible. It can be a little bit more informal in the style of writing and that kind of thing, and could be like first place to publish, and think about writing for that, if you're just kind of like wanting get out the gate, get something out the gate for the first time. So I would recommend looking and checking out that journal and looking at what others are publishing. A lot of it is based on the work that you're doing right now. And so you are the expert on what you're doing, and it can be an easier place to write about something on, that innovation that you and your team are working on right now at your library.
Anything to add, Anne?
I love all of those things mentioned. I feel like I'm often on the We Hear network, and the We Hear network I think has been a really great spot for me for the last decade in terms of reading lists and asking people questions and um, finding people that are in your local area to meet up with and things like that.
Cool. All right, next question. Would you recommend writing in preparation to apply for a faculty role if you're not currently in the faculty role now?
Yes, I'm just gonna say I started writing peer-reviewed articles when I was a student. If your goal is to get into an academic library, just start writing as soon as possible.
Yeah, I would just agree with what Denise said, that it's never too soon to start writing. You don't have to be a faculty member to do it. And I think that there's something that's interests you and that you are motivated to write about, just do it.
Cool. All right, so there are two questions coming now. Oh, well, hold up now. Okay, that's the second one. So people are in the chat were asking a couple of questions about funding. So I guess we can start with the second question. So what are some funding or grant sources that you're familiar with? And then what are you seeking funding for whenever you're looking for funding? Is it for leave time? Is it for travel? What is it for?
Well, the awards that I'm familiar with are like either research grants or kind of scholarships to go to specific conferences. I'm in Oregon, so we have ACRL Oregon/Washington, and they have a running scholarship where you can use it for extra classes. Like I'm looking into this mixed methods one that Jamila mentioned, and I'm like, ooh, this is kind of interesting. Or like Library Juice Press has a lot of great courses. And so I often use those types of grants and scholarships for that type of work. The Barnard Research Grant that I recently received is nice because I can use it for travel, hotel stay, flight, or childcare. And so childcare, I think, is one of those big things where, especially if you have to go places and you happen to be a parent, oftentimes these professional scholarships don't really consider childcare as a major expense. And for me, it's like the major expense if I leave town, because I'm like, even with flight and hotel and everything, it's that childcare where it's like, if I need 8 hours of childcare for a week's time, that could potentially be in the thousands of dollars. So, yeah, look for grants that are kind of like open-ended. But I haven't, I mean, if people have suggestions, I'd love to learn about them because I often see the types of like smaller grants for professional development. But I've heard of folks that are getting like huge grants, like the Mellon grants and things like that. I just haven't had any experience with that.
Yeah, I think in terms of like grants for writing and research, you can start with associations, and I think someone has already posted like chapters. A lot of the associations have conference scholarships, travel grants for that, as well as awards for research. And so you can look through ALA, ACRL, if you're into ALICE or ACES, all of them have something like that. And again, your local chapters also might as well, so that don't neglect those either. Um, and I think to Anne's point, there are definitely larger grants and things like that, that for large projects, big projects. And if you're not familiar with those, a lot of those larger grants they usually do some kind of like workshop or some kind of like Q&A for people who wanted to know about how to apply for those larger grants and for research studies. So there are resources for that as well. And then there's also grant writing workshops if you're wanting to do something along those lines, which is a little bit different from your grants for travel and research on a smaller scale.
I think the only thing I'll add is sometimes if you have a specific topic, like I know I don't know if they still have this, but ALA used to have the diversity research grants. I don't think that, I think they might be, I mean, I think the problem too is right now a lot of things are on hiatus or have been, you know, gutted because of IMLS and just this administration. But typically also funding can be used for, like, if you need SPSS or some specific software that you can't afford, or like again travel things. But I'm just trying to think or even like I know sometimes it's been to purchase books or um money for surveys. So if you want to do a big survey, you can give incentives. So the money, part of the grant will be towards helping you kind of provide that incentive for people to fill out the survey. I'm sure that a survey has come across your inbox that's like $25 if you complete the survey. So that's sometimes where the money comes, it's grants.
Good. All right, so I'm gonna post another question, which comes up actually a couple of times in a couple of different ways. So this question essentially is asking you, when do you know to take an idea from idea to the actual thing that you write about? So do you wait to see a call for proposals? Do you just create the project and write and then hope that you can find somewhere to publish it? So what is that process like for y'all? And this may be our last question, or maybe one more. We'll see. We'll see.
Well, I would say both apply. I think that um, if it's something you're really into, you might actually just start to write on that already, right? It's something you already want to work on, you're already doing and thinking about. And I would say move forward with that. And then an opportunity can come afterwards that you can publish in. I think Anne already kind of spoke to this, but sometimes with conferences, they put out their what their theme is for the year. And if you don't already have a piece, for it, it can be hard to get that together in time for it, right? But it is possible. So sometimes it can be a reactionary kind of thing, but sometimes it's something you're already thinking about and working on, and you already have it ready, and that's ideal. But it doesn't have to be that way. Also, let's just say you put conferences and things and whatnot aside, and you're just working on something that you want to have published. I would say one of the things you want to do is already look at what journals are out there and what they're publishing about, who's writing about what, so that you can identify places for a piece that you might be working on or want to work on in advance, right? So you will put together maybe a short list of journals that you know something that you're interested in would be welcome at that particular journal, and then you can start writing your piece with the idea in mind that you will begin to shop it to those journals once you have finished it. So there's always ways to get something out there. There are plenty of venues for publishing. You can also present something at a conference and write a piece for the conference proceedings. And I know that not all schools, like they weigh different things differently, right? Some places chapters are more important than journal articles, and articles could be more important in conference proceedings and that kind of thing. But I will say that a lot of times all of these things are helpful and can count towards something. And so you can look at how to diversify some of what you're doing in these different ways to get your work out there.
What often happens with me is that I have, colleagues that know kind of my particular research interests, and then we're all looking out for each other, because we're all on different listservs and things like that. And so as call for proposals, especially for kind of like chapter and conference proposals come through our email box, we're always just sending it to each other. And so oftentimes, like I would say the last like 2 or 3 CFPs that I responded to were actually colleagues from other institutions were like, have you seen this? You know, I think this would be great for you. Or have you seen this? I think this would be great for you. And also, I think we could workshop something else you said into this idea. So maybe, you know, maybe you don't have exactly, you know, because a recent article that or a recent chapter that I'm working on right now for ACRL publication is on student workers. And so I have some student workers, but I wouldn't necessarily think that student workers is kind of like my research area. But when combined with other colleagues and what we're all doing together on with the zine and the zine libraries in our institution around student workers, then suddenly it started making sense to my kind of publishing area. And so it took the kind of investment of another colleague to be like, I think we could actually talk about student engagement and student workers in a way that still like piques my research interest, kind of, to be honest. So I would say that for me, you know, I have a list of ideas, or I have plenty of outlines that I've developed, and oftentimes I see all these proposals coming through, and I don't know how to even respond to them. So if you have kind of like, if you can tighten up your, you know, kind of like research ideas to like maybe even a couple, then when those come through, you'll be able to kind of pivot a little bit easier. But if you're kind of all over the place and you're always trying to respond and be reactionary, as Jamila said, to whatever's coming, then it's harder because then you're kind of all over the place. So if you can kind of like tighten up your areas of focus, then I think it then actually becomes easier, because then you start becoming, even if you haven't published anything yet, your colleagues will know that that's your interest area, and then they'll be able to, you know, everyone kind of like the network will work itself out. I believe in the community network.
Well, folks, we are at time. I am so grateful for our panelists for joining us today. Everybody, round of applause for our panelists. Yes, yes. Round of applause for Megan for helping us get this organized, and for Jane for dropping links in the chat. We appreciate it. We will be sending out this recording as soon as possible. And hopefully we'll do this again next year.
Thanks for having
Bye.
us.
Thank you for
Bye.
moderating, Kay.
Thank you.
Of course.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you for coming.